The year is 1993. Cinematic masterpieces such as Jurassic Park and Mrs. Doubtfire had just graced the big screen. Movies were only getting better, but little did anyone know that off in the horizon were two Brooklyn plumbers ready to change the way nerds viewed cinema forever. Optimistic and naive, moviegoers and nerds alike took to the theaters, excited to watch one of their favorite and most beloved video game franchises played out on the big screen. With Coke in one hand and popcorn in the other, they patiently awaited the 1 hour and 44-minute disappointment that lay ahead. The curse had begun. For decades now, the film industry has pursued success by using famous video game IPs such as Mario, Resident Evil, and Tomb Raider. These movies were most often a box office success, but ask anyone who loves these franchises and they'll say these films underperformed. We here at 5-9 Gaming want to know why, so let's talk about it. What's up, guys? I'm Claire Bear with 5-9 Gaming, and today I'm joined by Hazink to talk about why video game movies nearly always underperform. How you doing, Hazink?
I'm doing well, my man. I am doing well. This is a topic that I've been looking forward to discussing, actually.
Me too. So this is going to be part one in what will likely be a 3-part series where we dive into how video game stories perform in other mediums like film and television. But before we get into how these movies were critically received, I wanted to start by talking to you about money. Money is what motivates these companies to make these movies and keeps the cycle going. None of these movies are critically acclaimed, but nearly all of them receive big returns on investments. At least the ones from the year 2000 forward. So for example, Warcraft made $440 million, over twice its budget of $160 million, and then Assassin's Creed brought in $241 million, a little under twice its budget of $125 million. So what do you think this is? Why do you think these movies just bring in lots of money? I guess that's the starting point here.
I've got no idea. I mean, honestly, who went to the cinema to see those movies? I think basically just people sometimes just want to go and see a movie. Sometimes people see these big action set pieces and they think, oh, I'm going to go and watch this, or they've maybe get a little bit of knowledge of the franchise and they think, you know what, I enjoyed that when I was younger. I enjoyed playing Assassin's Creed 1, or years ago I enjoyed playing Warcraft. Let's go and check out the movie. Because the thing is, once you go to see the film, then at the end of the day, the company's already made their money off you, so it doesn't matter if it's a bad movie. They've already got their ticket money at that point, and there's no going back. It's not like you can get a refund on your entry fee, you know. So
exactly.
I don't know.
I've had some time to think about it, and I was kind of thinking the same thing. Where it's like, you know, most movies. Let's talk about, like, you know, you got Tenet, which was really good, or you know, these movies that aren't based on a previous IP. They have to sell you to the idea of the movie before you even go see it. Something like Assassin's Creed, Warcraft. They don't have to sell you on the IP. You already love Assassin's Creed or Warcraft or any of these movies. You're kind of already in love with the idea of it. So that's like half the battle, I think. And I think that's why people are so easily going to see these movies. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And then, like, the other thing is, do you think the marketing is any better for these movies? Or is it just the IP?
I think a lot of the time it is the IP, because, like, when I seen the trailer for Warcraft, I knew it looked bad. You know what I mean? You could just tell by the trailer. With Assassin's Creed, I suppose it was slightly different. You got this vibe. It might have been a bit more like Desmond and that kind of stuff that was happening in the more current time. So there was still this little bit of hope that it could have been okay. Plus, Michael Fassbender's a great actor, and sometimes you look at the actor attached and you think, maybe this will be better. Maybe that actor wouldn't have signed up for a horrible script.
Exactly. I think that's why everyone was quick to think Assassin's Creed could be the turnaround point for video games movies. It's because they saw Michael Fassbender, who had just done, like, X-Men. You know, he had some big hits before this, so people thought, okay, this could be it. This could be the one. And the trailers were pretty good. You know, it gave you that basic idea of what an Assassin's Creed movie you would think it would be. Until we actually got in there and were let down. So I agree. Sometimes I feel like the marketing really picks up for these movies before they even come out. So.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes I think they do rely on the weight of the IP a lot, though. Definitely. Especially with some of the films that we're going to come across when we start going through the list of different things that have come out and how they've been received and stuff like that. I mean, some of them should have done better than they've done because of the IP, and some of them might surprise you that they've done so well considering the IP, you know?
Yeah. I just think it's interesting how these movies make just so much money based off of just the IP alone. And that's mostly the newer movies. Like, if we look at stuff like probably like Doom, or, you know, for example, the original Super Mario Bros. Movie, those didn't make a lot of money.
No.
And I think that's because people weren't as excited about the IPs yet. You know, Mario was a big thing back then, but I don't think people were like as anxious to get Mario on the big screen, you know?
I think Mario was a big thing back then, but it wasn't anywhere near as now, you know.
Yeah.
A Mario movie now would do completely different, and you obviously know they would treat a Mario movie differently now as well. That's the other thing. But again, I don't want to veer off on the wrong path here, be talking about stuff like that. But I do think that timing has a lot to do with it as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So the next point I really wanted to get into was, of course, the other side of the coin, the critical reception. So let's take a look at the critical reception of some of these movies here. I have this Rotten Tomatoes list pulled up with a collection of like 43 different movies. Some ones I'll point out is like Warcraft, which we've already talked about, which I think is further down this list. Right there. Warcraft has a 28% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 6.8 on IMDb, which is 6.8 on IMDb isn't good, but it's not terrible. But 28 on Rotten Tomatoes is bad. Assassin's Creed, which I just had pulled up, is extremely low too. Just 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, 5.7 on IMDb. I'd consider these movies critically underwhelming based on these numbers. Clearly, there's some outliers, but the majority of these films are all below 50%. So, like, if I scroll down here, you can see, you know, we have to get to the top 5 movies to get anything above 50%.
Yeah, it takes a while. It takes a while. Even just looking at this Rotten Tomatoes list, tomatoes. I say tomatoes. You say tomatoes. Looking at this Rotten Tomatoes list, there's a lot on here that I just don't agree with. As someone who's watched, I'd say probably 70 to 80% of these, if not more. There's a lot of this. There's a lot of this list that I just don't agree with. I actually walked away from quite a lot of these movies enjoying them, but then there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them I do totally agree with as well.
So I don't think many people go to these movies expecting these to be like cinematic masterpieces, right?
No.
But they fall short of people's expectations almost every time, though. Even if you kind of enjoyed it, you're like, they still could have done more with this. They could have pressed into these other things. So of course the big question: why do these movies suck? Like what is the one thing that's missing? Like how do we fix these? You got any ideas?
I think the easiest way to look at that is to look at the ones that have succeeded to see why the other ones have failed, and it generally seems to be what it's based on. A lot of times it is just literally if you take a game that doesn't have a big overriding story narrative and try and turn it into a movie, it seems to fail. Whereas if you take a film that's based on a story heavy game, then there is an exception to that we'll get to, but if it's got a good story in the gaming format, it seems to work quite well in movie. The problem is there is actually some franchises that have been made into movies. I'll use one as an example, Resident Evil, that actually has a decent story. It has good lore that they could have pulled from, but instead they decided to totally go in their own direction, which I think didn't sit that well with fans of the franchise. But it did sit pretty well with casual audience, because I'm sure if you look at the list of the money thing again, Resident Evil done really well financially. But
Resident Evil made lots of money.
I think people who actually enjoy the series don't necessarily like the movies at all.
Yeah, and looking at Resident Evil or really any of these titles, I feel like the reason they never do good, right, is because there's really two directions you can take these movies, right? You can make something that's completely the same as the original story, and it's going to be so hard to hit the same beats and emotional feelings that you get from playing the game, and so that just lets people down. Or you take it a completely different direction, and then people don't like that either because it's not what they were expecting. You know, like Assassin's Creed was completely different from what we expect of the animus and all that, and people were upset. But even if you try and make a film that's as close to the narrative of the game as possible, I think people still get upset, because you just can't hit those same story beats without having a 30 hour long session where you're also in control. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
And that's why I think the movies that do succeed, like let's look at, I mean, number one here is Angry Birds 2. Have you seen this movie?
I've got two kids. I've got two kids at 7-year-old, and I have seen that movie so many times. And
is it just hilarious?
It's really good, actually. It's actually really funny. Both of the Angry Birds movies are really funny, and the thing about it is it's based on a game that you flick birds at structures to break them down. So they didn't have a lot of groundwork for what was pre-established as the story and stuff like that. But what they did was, because it was animated, they got a lot of, I want to say, more adult focused voice actors, so people like Jason Sudeikis.
If you look at this list
like
here, you got a lot of funny people, you got big names and funny people.
Bill Hader and stuff like that. They're decent actors, and they did a good job. There's a fair bit of tongue in cheek, almost risky humour that goes on in it, and it's good.
Hmm.
I actually think it really, really works. I don't necessarily know if I'd put it at number one. I think the film that's at number three on this list deserves to be number one, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But Angry Birds and Angry Birds 2 actually did really well. I thought it was really good.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll get into these critically, successful ones in just a second. I have an article. I don't have it pulled up, but I have the kind of summary here. This is from Paul Tassi at Forbes, and it speaks on why video game movies don't usually succeed critically. And he gives two really good reasons that I think are interesting points we can talk about. The games adapted usually don't have amazing stories. For example, you have Sonic can have a good story if you care about it a lot, but like Rampage has like no story. Mario doesn't really have a big story, and that's why some of them fail, is because you're not that interested in the story. But I think that's something people can overcome with something like Sonic, And then the other thing is, the movies with good stories don't usually need movies, and I think that's the point that's more interesting. So stuff like the Last of Us, God of War, which are going to get film, TV renditions eventually, or like Mass Effect. The stories are so good that it's going to be so hard to convey that 30-hour long experience that you had playing that game into a 2-hour film or an 8-episode series on television. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's why these movies have a tougher time?
Yes and no, because I feel like we've already sort of touched on both of those points, and I don't mean blowing them out of the water. For the
Mm-hmm.
for the games with good stories, Resident Evil, like bringing out the movie, flies in the face of that because they decided not to use the good story, and that's possibly why it failed.
Yeah.
Then things like Angry Birds doing really well, which doesn't really have a story. I think it's just really how they approach it. I think if the game doesn't have a deep story attached, it can give the writers a bit more freedom in what they want to do, and the fact that
Yeah.
people go in with no expectations can make it a success. Whereas if they take something that does have a pre-established story and try to make something new out of it, you're more likely to, like we've said before, upset people, and it could be an absolute failure as well. So I think you need to kind of walk a line, if that makes sense. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think if it's something that is absolutely beloved, then it probably makes more sense to stick closer to the actual story of the game. Maybe do a sort of a spin-off in the same world or whatever, but I don't necessarily think that that's true what he said there, but I can see I can see the point he's getting at. I just think
Yeah.
lately some of the films that have came along kind of subvert expectations a little bit, and that's why they're kind of doing okay. I don't want to go in too much to the films I'm talking about. We'll
Mm-hmm.
get to that, but I do think that lately the films have been kind of proving that those
Yeah.
thoughts wrong.
I agree, and let's get into that. That's kind of my next point. I'd like to finish talk about the movies on this list by talking about the big ones. Pokemon,
I want to
Detective
I
Pikachu.
want to talk about the bad ones. Let's
Oh,
start with the good
we'll
part,
get
and
to
then
the
we'll go
bad
to the
ones.
bad.
We'll have a more open discussion on where we could trash talk the bad ones in a little bit. But I want to talk about these good ones. I want to talk about why they're good. Specifically, Detective Pikachu and Sonic, I think, are the big ones. Angry Birds 2, of course, is up here, and you've kind of spoke on that and why that one's good. But I think that one's good for the same reason Sonic and Pokemon Detective Pikachu are. And I think that's because they take an IP that you love and they use some of the resources but push it into an unexplored area where like Sonic, they made a good recreation of Sonic. Obviously, it took 2 tries to get him perfect, but they push into an area where you're not expecting or you don't know about, which is Sonic in the real world, where we've gotten renditions of Sonic with real people and stuff like that, but it's he was in San Francisco and stuff you're more comfortable with and understand, and just seeing something you love in a world you understand helps taper expectations and make you enjoy it more, in my opinion. And I think Detective Pikachu does the same thing, where it's like it's an IP you understand and love, but it's a world that you kind of haven't explored by taking it into the actual Pokemon world in real life. I just feel like it pushes things in a way you're not expecting, which you said, right, where it's subverting expectations kind of what you expect this video game movie to be.
Well, actually, with regards to Sonic and Pokemon, I actually think both of them have something in common. And what it is, believe it or not, more than the story or anything, I think both Detective Pikachu and Sonic the Hedgehog were kind of pushed by a standout performance. I think in Sonic the Hedgehog, Jim Carrey knocked it out of the park. I think Jim
Oh
Carrey
yeah.
was absolutely fantastic in it. And in Pokemon, I think Ryan Reynolds was fantastic as Pikachu. I think
Yeah.
those two things really helped elevate the movies. Yes, they had decent stories and stuff like that, but more than anything else, I think the fact that there was two standout performances in them really, because I genuinely watched Pokemon Detective Pikachu, and I felt like I was watching a children's version of Deadpool, just because it become
Yeah.
ingrained in my head that Ryan Reynolds is Deadpool, and I kind of almost got that vibe from Pokemon, and I feel like that's how he went for it, and I really enjoyed it. I thought the special effects were really good in it. I thought the way
Mm-hmm.
they'd done the Pokemon in the real world worked really well. And the same with Sonic, I think that the way they tackled how Sonic was in the real world, I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think it might have been deliberate. I think the absolutely awful character design that they went for initially with Sonic, there is still this little part of me that thinks that was a deliberate marketing ploy.
Oh,
Um,
looking back on it, it totally makes sense because I don't know, man. It was such a terrible design. Like, who greenlit that?
there's no way they looked at that and decided this is the way that we want to go for
This
Sonic the
is what the
Hedgehog.
people will want to see. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I just think that those two films have kind of, how do I put it, set comic book movies, set video game movies up to say, look, this is what you can do. If you give a bit of love, if you put a bit of money behind it, a good bit of marketing, and you don't just try and do a cheap cash in, this is what you can come up with. And although both of them don't have that great scores on Rotten Tomatoes, I think they
Hmm.
deserve higher scores. Genuinely, I think they deserve higher scores. I think they're better movies
I
than
think
this
I agree.
site's giving them credit for.
So, looking at these top ones, I kind of the big three right now. Looking at them, do you think these more serious movies, these more dramatic, action-paced movies, have a chance against these movies that have more comic relief, are more forgiving? I guess. Do you think something like Tomb Raider will have a chance competing against, a Detective Pikachu? Do those movies have a better chance of success just because they're funny and they can have better writing? I guess.
I don't know, because I thought Tomb Raider was okay up until the final third. Like Tomb Raider
Mm.
was an okay movie until you got to the final third, and then it was just absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
It was awful. It just went so far down the hill that it was unbelievable. Um, but I think people are more forgiving of comedies, because if you look at the top three movies, they are comedies. I
Yeah.
suppose Detective Pikachu is a family movie, but watching the film, it was more or less a comedy. So obviously, you can
Hmm.
see here just by looking at the list, the general consensus from reviewers and stuff like that is going to be that a comedy film has a bit more leeway and a bit more chance to succeed. Because if you go back a wee bit and look at the
Yeah.
three films below that, although Mortal Kombat I think is better again than it's getting credit for here,
Oh, I
Rampage,
agree on that
Tomb
too.
Raider, I mean, I still don't know what Rampage actually was. I mean, as a game, it was about big overblown monsters smashing up a town. That was it. That was the story,
Yeah, yeah.
But they just kind of made that something altogether different. I don't really know why that was even a video game movie. I mean, it didn't really make sense to me. It wasn't awful by any stretch of the imagination, but
Hmm.
it, you could have easily just called it Monster Mayhem or something like that and not had Rampage name attached to it, and it would
Well,
have still
I
been the
think they
same movie.
probably I think they probably grabbed the Rampage name just as a selling point. We were talking about it earlier where people were like, they already love the franchise. So many people are nostalgic for probably Rampage, and they're
I,
like, oh,
that,
there's a Rampage movie. Oh,
but,
it's got Dwayne Johnson.
but
Those are the
that's the
two selling
thing.
points I need. I'm gonna go watch it.
I don't really think it does, though. I mean, Rampage was made by Midway, and it was never. I mean, yeah, back in its day, it was a semi-big game, but I don't
Hmm.
think that Rampage is like this big IP. Do you know what I mean? It's not the first thing I would think
Well,
of.
yeah, no, but it's. I feel like it still helps sell it a little more.
Yeah, that would be true. I suppose it would probably get some bums in seats from people that were born in the 80s, played games back then and stuff like that. They might think I'll go and see it. But it was a weird one for me. I don't really know why they went with it. Then if you look back at something like Mortal Kombat, that's weird because there has been a couple of films so far based on fighting games,
Hmm.
sorry, and I remember when Mortal Kombat came out, I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. I remember the song at the start of it and stuff like that. I just absolutely loved that movie.
Hmm.
But it's the only film based on a fighting game, which when you think about it, a fighting game should be something that's a bit easier to adapt into a movie, because action movies shouldn't. I mean, I'm sorry, to any filmmakers watching this, I don't mean to make your craft sound easier than it is, but you would imagine that it would be easier to make a fighting movie, a game based on a fighting game into a movie, than it would be some of these other deeper things like Final Fantasy and that you can see here,
Yeah.
because you've already had. There's a whole genre of fighting movies. I mean, in the 90s and
Yeah,
2000s,
you just
had.
push into that.
Yeah, I mean, films like Bloodsport, AWOL, do you know what I mean? Just all the Bruce Lee
Hmm.
films, they were there. Do you know what I mean? It's not hard to make a film. I say it's not hard to make a film. It is obviously hard to make a film, right? But you get what I'm saying here.
It
It
shouldn't
feels
be
like,
as hard
yeah,
compared to some of these other
yeah,
ones.
but yeah, some of the biggest failures are fighting game movies. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
I
you've
mean,
got like
what else? Where's it at?
the,
Dead or Alive is up here too.
oh my god,
Because
that was so bad. That was so
it
bad,
should
that
be
movie.
easier, in my opinion, because you don't have the stress of crossing with your story. Mortal Kombat in 1995, there wasn't as much lore or story as there is in 2020.
Yeah.
So you can kind of just take the characters and push it whatever direction you want. You just
Yep.
need to have good writing, good dialogue, and
Definitely.
then kind of stay true to what little lore there was at the time.
Hmm.
So it should be easier to do that than something like Tomb Raider, where there's more established lore to go off of, especially 20 years down the line.
And then obviously you've got Street Fighter as well, which is a weird one for me because I now love Street Fighter. I hated it at the time. I thought it was a big mistake. And I think one of the biggest mistakes about that film was making it a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. I love Jean-Claude Van Damme. I've got to say he's probably one of my favourite action stars,
Yeah.
because I was just addicted to his film growing up when I was younger. I'd watch Bloodsport, AWOL, all that kind of stuff all the time.
Mhm.
And it was weird watching Guile having this weird French style accent. Yeah, he was the American
Yeah.
army man. But then Raoul Jules brought out like one of the best performances ever as Bison. He was fantastic as Bison, but people don't really credit it until he'd obviously passed away and they look back at it
Yeah.
in time. That it's one of these cheesy, campy films that actually you can sit down and watch and really enjoy. But I do understand
Yeah,
why it's got
I
10.
think that's where a lot of these movies end up in our memories now. Looking back at something like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, it's just a movie you can go back at and appreciate what it was. Not you don't appreciate it for the masterpiece, the cinematic masterpiece it's trying to be. You just appreciate it because it's enjoyable. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I think most of these movies are at least somewhat enjoyable. I can't speak for Assassin's Creed. I didn't enjoy that movie at all.
Well,
But
I
a lot
can
of these
I can point
are
out an
enjoyable.
awful movie. I'd love to know if you've watched it. Did you ever watch Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li?
I did not.
Oh my god.
I want to
That-
go rewatch some of these movies. I want to go watch Street Fighter right now, just talking about it.
Rewatch Street Fighter, yes, but do not watch Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li. It is so bad. It's like it has literally no link to the apart from calling the characters Chun-Li and Bison and stuff like that. It has no correlation to the game whatsoever. I do not know what they were thinking about when they made that movie.
I mean, if you want a movie like that, just watch Super Mario Bros. Like,
Oh, well.
I think that's how you truly mess up a movie is when you just take the names and the world. I think that's how you get the worst video game movies, because then you're like saying screw the fans. We don't care about the story that you love.
Oh,
We
yeah.
just want your IP so we can sell it. And I think that's where people get the most upset.
The thing is, you can
And that's
make a
how you get
full
things like
story about.
this.
We could actually sit and make a full video about the stuff that went on with Super Mario Bros. They had Dennis
Oh my
Hopper,
God.
an absolutely fantastic seasoned actor, and
Mm-hmm.
there's so many stories going about how he knew, even though he didn't know a lot about the game, he knew what they were making was absolute rubbish. It was just absolute rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of stories about the trouble that went on behind the scenes. They just knew they were making a bad movie, and they knew they were making mistakes all the way through, but they just pushed on and pushed on, because the studio they wanted it to happen. But like
Yep.
know when your actors are making films saying, "Are we sure we want to do this?" You know that you're not onto a winner.
Yeah, for sure. I watched Super Mario Bros. Pretty recently. By recently, I mean like maybe a couple years ago, and I can't even enjoy that one. Like watching it just to talk trash on it, I still can't enjoy it. It's just,
Yeah.
it's such a disappointment. Are there any others on this list that really are calling out to you that you want to speak on?
Well, there's ones that I enjoyed and there's ones that I disliked.
Hmm.
I actually enjoyed the Silent Hill movie, the first one,
Yeah.
not the second one. I actually thought they'd done a good job with that. I thought that it captured the story beats of the game quite well. I liked the way that she was kind of. I don't want to spoil the film because some people might still not have seen it. I just liked the way that they done it. I thought that
Hmm.
because of, unlike Resident Evil, I felt like it tried to be more true to the game. And
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed Silent Hill. I thought Silent Hill definitely deserves a better place on this list than it's got. And I actually thought
Hmm.
Silent Hill was slightly more well received than I'm seeing here, which I'm slightly surprised at. I
Yeah.
also, Ratchet and Clank's a funny one. Ratchet and Clank,
See, I
again,
never watched this. I
w-
I honestly forgot this came out.
well, Ratchet and Clank's a weird one. Ratchet and Clank's good, however, it's basically what you touched on already. You said before, I think, that if you take a film that's maybe based on a game that's got 10, 15, 20 hours of gameplay that sucks you in and it pulls you in, and you need that for the story, that's essentially what Ratchet and Clank is. Ratchet and Clank is the story with the gameplay elements missing, and what you find is those gameplay elements are important to your investment in the story. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Seeing Ratchet and Clank getting from A to B, you physically controlling that and making it happen. It was a good film to a certain extent. It just wasn't a masterpiece or anything. But I think that it having 21% on here is a bit mean.
Oh
But
yeah.
it,
I
but
mean,
it it did feel like a collection of cutscenes stuck together. That's probably the biggest issue with it, if you ask me.
yeah, I can feel like that's where a big problem comes in. I mean, one of the ones that shocks me is that the original Pokemon movies are so low, and maybe that's my nostalgia just carrying me to thinking these movies were a lot better at the time. But even the first Pokemon movie has like a 15%, which
Yeah.
I feel like they didn't have to deal with the problem of like trying to convince fans to come in because it was kind of its complete own story, not much to do with the game. You know, it was
Yep.
just a continuation of the anime at the time. And I'm shocked that these are rated as low as they are. Maybe I need to rewatch them. Maybe they don't hold up, but
Being on this list, unlike Pokemon Detective Pikachu, when I was looking at this list originally, I was like, I don't know why I was thinking this, but I just felt like Pokemon being on here was a sort of a cheat thing. And I know that'll probably sound silly,
well,
right?
yeah, I kind of agree. I
But
think it's not in the same genre as the rest of these.
yeah, because Pokemon had established itself as an anime very early on. I mean, yes, it's an anime based on a game franchise, right? But
Hmm.
Pokemon, the anime, is a whole other thing entirely. Do you know what I mean? Yes, it
Yeah.
takes a cat, but that's what it's spun off of. It's not really spun off of the game as such. It's spun off of the Pokemon anime.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I feel like, yeah, I get why it's on here, but I just feel like it's a bit of a cheap entry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
But
agree.
I
I feel
have
like it's kind of weird to have them on the list,
I have
but
also seen the worst film on this list. I have seen Alone in the Dark, which was awful.
I have not.
That was awful. It was just awful.
I mean, we talked about Street Fighter. That's kind of the one I want to go rewatch. You know.
Street Fighter.
Yeah, yeah, the original
Yeah,
one.
you'll enjoy it. I mean, there's
I did not know this movie existed at all.
it's
So did
just
they
really good.
just take the name Street Fighter and Chun Li and then chuck it onto a film?
Oh no, don't watch that. Please don't watch that.
All right.
Just please don't watch that. Watch the one with Jean-Claude Van Damme, yes, but do not watch the Legend of Chung Li.
Okay, okay.
It's please
And then
just
Alone in the Dark. I've only heard of it because of it's so bad. I
yeah.
have no reason to go watch it, but I have heard horror stories of how it's such a terrible movie.
It's terrible. And they also released a game of the movie, which was
Hmm.
just. I know. Did they release a game of the movie? No, they released the movie was based on one of the worst Alone in the Dark games. It's just awful. It was just like completely
Horrible choice. Horrible choice.
awful. I kind of liked Doom. I know that's bad. I didn't
The
hate.
2005 one
Yeah,
with
I didn't.
Dwayne Johnson. Yeah.
I like The Rock though. I mean, The Rock definitely helps a movie a bit for me because I was a massive wrestling fan, and whenever I see The Rock in something, there's also a degree of I quite like that. And it's
Yeah.
not just does it get The Rock in it, it's got Carl Urban in it as well, who's
Yeah, Carl's in it too. I didn't
obviously
even know.
most people will now know him as from The Boys. Obviously he's in The Boys on Amazon
I found him
Prime.
from when he started doing the Star Trek movies. I'm sure I've seen him in plenty of stuff, but that was when I first noticed him was when he did the reworks of the Star Trek movies. So
Yeah, he'd been in quite a few
that's got some
things.
good names too.
He'd been in a few things. He was in what else was he in? He was in Ragnarok, he's the gatekeeper guy that
Yep, yep.
like come see my treasures kind of thing. I
Hmm.
like him, but I like the section on that where it switches to the first person shooter
The
mode.
first person. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was the first time I'd actually seen that in a movie, which I thought was quite cool as well. And
Yeah, that is
obviously
interesting.
the other standouts for me on here was I sort of liked the first Tomb Raider when it came out. I've rewatched it, but and it's awful. But when
I
it
also
came
kind of
out,
liked this when it
quite
came
good.
out. I wasn't too against Prince of Persia, mostly because I like Jake Gyllenhaal and Ben Kingsley, and that's the thing with a lot of movies is like you like the actors and it kind of carries it a little bit, but at the end of the day, the plot just falls out for a lot of these movies.
I liked Prince of Persia. I forgot that was on here. I liked that. I thought it was a good movie. But I love the
Yeah,
Sands
yeah,
of
it's one of
Time.
the better ones.
I love the game. I mean, Prince of Persia:
Yeah.
The Sands of Time is just legendary. It's so good, and
Hmm.
I liked the movie as well. I thought the movie was pretty good. I could have seen
It
that
and it,
becoming a franchise, but it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I even reading this little critic consensus right here, it says it's substantial improvement over most video game adaptations, which I think is true. I mean, 37% is nothing to write home about, but compared to the rest of the list, it's pretty good. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I think they
um,
kind of went for a Pirates of the Caribbean style vibe, big budget,
yeah,
pull you into the world sort of a thing. I thought they did an
hmm
okay job with it. I did. I liked the
I
Sands of
thought
Time.
so as well. So, little side note, let's talk about some TV shows real quick. I assume you've seen some of them. Shows like Castlevania and The Witcher. They've been more successes than the movies.
Technically, The
Uh,
Witcher isn't a. Technically, Witcher is not based on a game. It's based on the books. A lot of people
It
don't know
is,
that though.
but a lot
A
of
lot.
people assume it. A lot of people haven't read the books and they've just played the games,
Mhm.
and so they run with it like it's based off the games. Which
Yeah.
you're correct. It is based off the books, um, but it is people come to it because they played the game. A lot of
Yeah,
people.
yeah, I'll agree with that. And not only that, it caused the game to have a massive resurgence as well. So clearly,
Hmm.
there's some bleed over there for both.
There's
So
there's at least a little correlation. Same with Castlevania. It's not like I don't think anybody. I mean, obviously people are still playing Castlevania games here and there, but it's not like they're current IPs that people are crazy about. Ty Gooden from Nerdist says it's because the animation and fight scenes are good, but the main reason these shows are better than movie counterparts is because the characters they're well developed and they have solid motivations. Do you think movies just have a harder time getting this across? Should TV be the preferred medium to tell video game stories? Because movies you get 2 hours, two
yeah,
and a half. I think most of these probably only hit like an hour and a half.
yeah.
While TV shows you get 8 hours if you do 8 episodes. Do you think that should be the preferred medium for these video game stories?
Well, funnily enough, I do think that ties into what you said earlier. I think it depends on the source. Basically, like you said earlier, it's quite hard to take a 30-hour game and condense it down into a 2-hour movie. You're going to miss a
Hmm.
lot of story beats. You're going to skip over a lot of character development, etc. The thing about a lot of these games is if you looked at a game like an anime, for example, a game itself has arcs. Do you know what I mean? It will have bits that you could quite
Yeah.
easily chop up and say, okay, that the first 5-6 hours of that was like essentially an arc, and then you've got the next one and the next one. So you could take a 30-hour game and potentially cut that 30-hour game into a 2 or a 3 series TV show. You could. Let's
Hmm.
be honest, you could definitely do that. With a film, you can't do that. With a TV show, you can do that. So for some, for quite a lot actually, I think TV would be better, especially modern TV, because modern TV now
Yeah.
is not what it was. People are able to binge watch a TV show like a movie, and let's be honest,
Hmm.
most of us now do that. Um,
Exactly.
they could drop 10 hours of I don't want to pick something that actually is in production. They could drop 10 hours of something like World of Warcraft, right? They could
Yeah.
drop a 10-hour TV show
Or like
that
a Mass Effect or something like that.
yeah, something that was a fantastic epic, where people, if they want to sit and watch it like a 10-hour movie, then by all means go ahead and do that. Or they
Exactly.
could watch it broken up. Yeah, I think, and with the budget that's now getting into these movies as well, with people like Netflix, I think that, yeah, you could potentially see a lot more things coming out that will succeed, and I think it kind of opens up the scope for what we could see coming forward as well. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously there's a few in the works, but there's a lot
We'll
more
get
I
into
could see
that into
succeeding.
the second part of this hopefully 3-part series. Next time we'll talk about the movies and shows that are already announced to be coming out, and we'll kind of give our thoughts and expectations on whether those will succeed or not succeed. Is there anything else you want to cover in this part one?
No, I just think that basically, what I want to ask you, right, is when you look at
Hmm.
some of these films, what do you think, right, from the ones that you've seen, what do you think they could have done differently, right? Not to make money, to
Hmm.
satisfy the fans. Let's not worry about the critics, to satisfy the fans, because
Yeah.
I'd say that a lot of these critical scores do generally represent what the fans think, i.e., if you look at Resident Evil, it's got a low score, it's generally not
Hmm.
that liked by the fans, right? So,
Yeah.
what do you think? Let's just take, for example, the first Resident Evil movie. What score's it got on here? It's got 35% for the first Resident
Yeah.
Evil movie. I would argue that the first Resident Evil movie is probably the closest to any of the games, right? Apart from
Hmm.
Alice, right? Because obviously Alice is a new character. What do you feel they could have done in that movie to win the fans over more than they did? So what changes would you have made to make that a better film?
Oh man. I mean, obviously, I'm of the idea that these should all just be TV series. But if we're keeping it with a movie, I think you need to have a better introduction to these characters and make people actually care about the film version of these characters. I think too often people just take the name with like Tomb Raider and they're just like, you know who she is. Let's just get into it. But we don't learn to care about these film versions of these characters that we already love. That's why I think like Detective Pikachu, we love the Pokemon franchise, but they took time to make us care about the characters. They made us care about Pikachu, and they made us care about I forget what the kid's name was, but we took time to actually get invested in them.
Mhm.
I think a lot of them move too quickly and making us just go with the flow straight into the action, and they think these little catchy things like, oh, I remember that from the game, will keep us hooked into the movie. Same with like Assassin's Creed. It's just like, here's the Animus, you know what that is. Here's the Assassin's Order. Like these are things but that's not what makes you care about the movie.
Mhm.
I don't care about a lot of these film versions of these characters, and I think that's where it's lacking. It's the writing and it's the time. They need to let these characters develop. I think that's how you make these series better. Make it a little longer and just give these characters time to grow.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I definitely agree with that because not only does that ring true for Detective Pikachu, it also rings true
Mm-hmm.
for Sonic as well because they did reintroduce us to the character. They made you care about his backstory, where he came from, why he was on Earth,
Yeah.
etc. So that again, it ticks the boxes of what you just said there, and you can. It'd be hard to argue that those films weren't a success. There is one that I do notice is missing from this list, and I'm wondering why it's not on here. Final
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy VII Advent Children. They've got the
Yeah,
other
and
Final Fantasy, but they don't have Advent Children on here. I wonder how
I don't
that
know why it's
actually.
not on here either. Because I rewatched that like last year, and it's honestly because we watched it after we played the remake. What do you think of that film?
I like it. I mean, it's different. I wish Sephiroth was in it a little bit more, but
Yeah.
I did enjoy that film. Hang
Yeah,
on,
I
I'm just
didn't think
going
it was
to.
too bad either. I think that one, it's easier
Oh, that
to
get
do the
30.
thing like I said, where you just
That get
assume.
that get 33%. I just looked it up there. I get 33%, 84%
Yeah.
with the audience, but 33% with the critics.
Hey, 33% would put it at number 12 on this list, so not that bad.
That's crazy.
Um, I think I, I think that one's also a fallacy of like, they just assume you know all these characters. I think that's why it wouldn't hold up as just a film by itself. Like you have to know the Final Fantasy story, or at least Final Fantasy VII, to
hmm
care about some of these characters, right? Do you agree?
hmm hmm
So
Definitely.
I think that's where these movies make mistakes, and I mean that's mostly for people who haven't seen it. But even the people who have played these games, I think they take for granted that people still need to take time to fall in love with the film version of these characters. And I think that's
Yeah.
the biggest takeaway for a lot of these movies is making me care about the characters. When you take something like Angry Birds, they have to take the time to make you care about the characters because you don't know anything about them. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Definitely.
Same with Sonic and you know Sonic, but they kind of just use him as the funny man, but they let you fall in love with the other characters, James and Tika. I can't remember what their names were in the show, but you learn to fall in love with those characters, and I think that's what a lot of these lack is falling in love with the characters. So that would be my big takeaway from these movies is make me fall in love with them.
No, I would agree with that as well. Definitely. Don't just rely on the name of the franchise. Actually, make you care about the story that they're telling.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want to remind everyone that this is part one and what will be a part three series. This episode we talked about all the old movies from 1990 and forward. I think is probably about how far it goes back. And then next time we're going to talk about what's coming soon in the next probably 2 years, 3 years or so, what's in development, give our thoughts on that. And then in the last one, we will talk about what we want from what's not already out here or what we want to see redone, stuff like that. I want to remind you to like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let us know what your opinions are on these movies. Do you agree, disagree? Make sure you're following 5'9". You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow Hazink. We've enjoyed talking, and we hope to see you guys again. Anything else?
No, that's everything, man. Just like we said, just make sure you follow 5'9". Make sure you check part 2 out. Would love to know your thoughts, and maybe we can cover some of the things you say when we do a future discussion on this.
For sure, for sure. Well, we appreciate you guys, and y'all have a good day. Later, Hazink.
Bye.